Your like, your subscription, that's another story we can tell. Comment below. Where are you watching from and what time is it where you are? Let's start. In the abandoned subways of Tokyo, something still breathes. I should have listened to the warnings. The locals in Shibuya had been clear enough some places are abandoned for good reason. But when you're 26, broke, and desperate to make your mark as a documentary filmmaker, common sense tends to take a backseat to ambition. That's how I found myself standing at the entrance to Tokyo's forgotten subway system at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, armed with nothing but a handheld camera, a dying flashlight, and the kind of stupidity that only comes with youth. My name is Marcus Chen, and 3 months ago, I thought I was going to change the world with my camera. I'd moved to Tokyo on a journalism visa, convinced that I could uncover stories that the major networks missed. The rent in my shoebox apartment in Harajuku was bleeding me dry, and my savings were running dangerously low. That's when I stumbled across the urban exploration forums discussing Tokyo's abandoned infrastructure specifically, a section of subway tunnel that had been sealed off since the 1995 earthquake. The tunnel system I was about to enter wasn't just any abandoned subway. According to my research, it was part of an experimental line that Tokyo Metro had been developing in the early 1990s, a deep-bore tunnel system designed to connect the outer districts with the city center. Construction had been nearly complete when the Great Hanshin earthquake struck. While Tokyo itself wasn't severely damaged, the psychological impact was enough to halt the project indefinitely. The tunnels were sealed, the funding diverted, and within a year, most people had forgotten they existed. But I hadn't forgotten. I'd spent weeks tracking down former construction workers, retired metro officials, anyone who might have information about the sealed sections. Most wouldn't talk, but an old engineer named Takeshi Yamamoto had finally agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Shinjuku. He was in his 70s, with hands that shook slightly as he sipped his black coffee, and eyes that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "You want to know about the Kita Shinagawa extension?" he'd asked in heavily accented English. "Some things should stay buried, young man." But when I pressed him, showing him my press credentials and explaining my documentary project, he'd sighed deeply and pulled out a hand-drawn map on yellowed paper. The tunnel entrance, he explained, was hidden behind a maintenance shed near Oimachi Station. The official records listed it as permanently sealed, but Yamamoto knew better. "We didn't just abandon it because of the earthquake," he'd whispered, leaning closer across the small table. "There were problems, accidents, workers who went down and came back, changed. The company buried it all, of course, paid families to stay quiet, but I was there. I saw what happened to Sato-san." He wouldn't elaborate on what had happened to Sato-san, no matter how much I pushed. He just shook his head, finished his coffee, and stood to leave. But before he walked away, he'd grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "If you're fool enough to go down there, remember this: the deepest level isn't on any official blueprint. And whatever you do, don't follow the breathing sounds." I should have asked what he meant by breathing sounds. I should have thanked him for the warning and walked away. Instead, I'd taken his map and spent the next week planning my descent. Now, standing in the pre-dawn darkness beside the rusted maintenance shed, I was beginning to question my judgment. The area around Oimachi Station was eerily quiet at this hour, with only the distant hum of the first morning trains beginning their routes on the active lines. The shed itself looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, paint peeling, metal corroded, and a heavy padlock that had been cut sometime in the recent past. Clearly, I wasn't the first urban explorer to find this place. I checked my equipment one final time. Camera fully charged, spare batteries, LED headlamp, emergency whistle, protein bars, and 2 bottles of water. My phone showed full signal strength, though I doubted it would last once I got underground. I told my girlfriend Yuki that I was filming B-roll footage around the city, another lie to add to the growing collection I'd been building since arriving in Tokyo. The shed's door creaked open with surprising ease, revealing a narrow concrete staircase descending into absolute darkness. The air that wafted up was stale and oddly warm, carrying with it the scent of rust, concrete dust, and something else I couldn't quite identify, something organic and unpleasant. I flicked on my headlamp and started recording. October 15th, 2:52 a.m. This is Marcus Chen beginning descent into the abandoned Kitoshinagawa tunnel system. If anyone finds this footage... I paused, suddenly realizing how ominous that sounded. Well, hopefully, they won't need to. The staircase was steep and seemingly endless. I counted 97 steps before reaching the first landing, where a heavy metal door stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, the beam of my headlamp revealed a long concrete corridor stretching into darkness. The walls were lined with pipes and electrical conduits, all covered in a fine layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years, except for the footprints. They were recent, maybe a few days old at most. Boot prints in the dust, size 10 or 11, leading deeper into the tunnel. I wasn't the first person to visit this place recently, which should have been reassuring. Instead, it filled me with an inexplicable sense of dread. As I followed the corridor, my footsteps echoed strangely in the confined space. The sound seemed to bounce and return from directions that didn't make sense, as if the tunnel system was larger and more complex than the simple linear path I was following. After about 10 minutes of walking, I reached a junction where the main corridor split into 3 separate passages. The middle passage was the widest, clearly designed for train traffic. The left passage was narrower, probably for maintenance access. But it was the right passage that caught my attention. It sloped downward at a steep angle, and unlike the other two, it seemed to be completely free of dust. As if something had been moving through it regularly. I checked Yamamoto's map. The right passage wasn't marked on it. That's when I heard it for the first time, a sound so faint I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. It came from the unmarked passage, a rhythmic whisper of air that sounded almost like breathing. Deep, slow, deliberate breathing, as if something massive was sleeping just out of sight in the darkness below. I stood frozen for nearly a full minute, straining to listen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was definitely there, rising and falling in a steady rhythm that seemed too regular, too purposeful to be merely air circulation. I should have turned around. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out, to climb those 97 steps and forget I'd ever heard of the abandoned subway system. But I was a documentarian, and this was exactly the kind of inexplicable mystery that could make my career. I started down the unmarked passage, following the sound of that impossible breathing, completely unaware that with each step, I was moving further away from the world I knew and deeper into something that should never have been disturbed. The descent felt endless. The unmarked passage spiraled downward in a gentle curve, taking me far deeper than any subway system had any right to go. My altimeter watch, a gift from my adventure photographer father, showed I was now nearly 60 meters below street level, well beyond the depth of Tokyo's deepest train lines. The breathing sound grew stronger with each step, no longer a whisper but a distinct, rhythmic susurrus that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The architecture down here was different too. Gone were the standard concrete walls and industrial fixtures I'd seen in the upper levels. Instead, the passage was lined with smooth, dark stone that looked almost organic in the wavering beam of my headlamp. The ceiling curved overhead in a perfect arch, and strange symbols were carved at regular intervals along the walls, not Japanese characters, not any writing system I recognized. They looked old, ancient even, I paused to film them, running my fingers over the deep grooves. The stone was warm to the touch, which made no sense at this depth. If anything, it should have been cold down here, but the air was growing warmer as I descended, carrying with it that same organic smell I'd noticed at the entrance, stronger now, more cloying. It reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. My phone had lost signal completely 20 minutes ago, and the GPS was showing nothing but static. I was officially off the grid in a place that didn't exist on any map. The journalist in me was thrilled. The human being in me was starting to panic. 3:31 a.m., I whispered to my camera. I'm now approximately 60 meters below street level in what appears to be a pre-existing tunnel system. The construction style doesn't match anything from the 1990s project. This could be significant. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from behind me, echoing down the passage I just traveled. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was following the exact path I'd taken. I killed my headlamp immediately, plunging myself into absolute darkness, and pressed my back against the warm stone wall. The footsteps continued, neither speeding up nor slowing down. Step, step, step. Each one perfectly timed, perfectly placed. In the darkness, my other senses became hyperactive. I could smell whoever it was, a sharp, metallic scent mixed with something medicinal, like disinfectant. And underneath that, the organic smell was stronger, as if my pursuer was somehow connected to whatever was producing that cloying odor. I held my breath and waited. The footsteps grew closer, and I began to make out something else, a soft scraping sound, as if the person walking was dragging something behind them. Metal on stone, rhythmic and purposeful. Then, impossibly, they walked past me. I was pressed against the wall in a passage barely wide enough for two people, but whoever it was simply continued down the tunnel without pausing, without seeming to notice me at all. As they passed, the metallic smell grew overwhelming, and I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from gagging. Through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of a pale shape moving past, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a maintenance worker's coveralls. The footsteps faded into the distance, following the same path I'd been taking, toward the source of the breathing sound. I waited another 5 minutes before daring to turn my headlamp back on. The passage ahead was empty, but on the stone floor, I could see fresh scuff marks from boots and parallel scratches from whatever had been dragged behind the mysterious walker. The scratches were deep, carved into stone that should have been too hard to mark so easily. I had two choices: turn around and try to make it back to the surface, or continue forward and risk encountering whoever or whatever had just passed me. The smart choice was obvious. The choice I made was the one that had gotten me into this mess in the first place. I followed the scratches. The passage began to widen as I continued downward, eventually opening into a vast underground chamber that defied belief. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling. The breathing sound here was loud enough to feel in my chest, a deep, rhythmic whooshing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But it was what I saw in the center of the chamber that made me question my sanity. Train cars. A complete subway train, sitting on tracks that shouldn't exist, in a space that wasn't supposed to be here. But these weren't modern cars, they looked decades old, maybe from the 1960s or 70s. Their metal surfaces covered in rust and strange, phosphorescent growths that pulsed with a sickly green light. The breathing was coming from the train. As I approached, I could see that the cars were somehow alive. The metal sides expanded and contracted in perfect rhythm, and a network of dark, vine-like structures connected each car to the stone floor and walls. It was as if the train had become part of the chamber itself, or perhaps the chamber had grown around it. The windows were fogged from the inside, but I could make out shapes moving within human-sized silhouettes that swayed with the breathing motion of the cars. And standing beside the first car, exactly where I'd expected to find them, was the figure in coveralls who had passed me in the passage. They were facing away from me, completely motionless, and in their right hand was a long metal tool that left scratches in stone. Some kind of industrial chisel or pry bar, dark with what looked like rust, but could have been something else entirely. I raised my camera and started recording, but as soon as the device's small LED indicator light came on, the figure began to turn. I will never forget what I saw when they faced me. It was human in shape, but the proportions were wrong: too tall, limbs too long, fingers that extended just a bit too far. The coveralls hung loose on a frame that seemed to be mostly angles and joints. But it was the face that nearly made me drop the camera. It was Yamamoto, the old engineer who had given me the map, who had warned me about this place. But it was Yamamoto as he might look after decades underground, skin pale and waxy, eyes that reflected my headlamp beam like an animal's. And when he smiled, his teeth had grown too long, too sharp, adapted for something that wasn't quite human anymore. "Marcus Gunn," he said in a voice like grinding concrete, "I told you not to follow the breathing sounds." That's when I realized the truth. Yamamoto hadn't given me the map as a warning, he'd given it to me as an invitation. The coffee shop meeting, the hand-drawn directions, the cryptic warnings that only made me more curious. It had all been carefully orchestrated to bring me to this moment, to this place. I ran. Running through absolute darkness while trying to hold a camera steady is harder than you might think. My headlamp beam bounced wildly as I sprinted back up the passage, throwing crazy shadows on the warm stone walls. Behind me, I could hear Yamamoto, or whatever Yamamoto had become, following at that same measured pace. No hurry, no urgency, just step, 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 and the scraping of metal on stone. He knew something I didn't. He knew I wasn't going to escape. The passage that had seemed endless on the way down now felt impossibly long going up. My lungs burned from the thick, warm air, and my legs were already cramping. Worse, the symbols carved in the walls were glowing now, a faint phosphorescent light that pulsed in rhythm with the breathing sounds behind me. The entire tunnel system was alive, and I was running through its digestive tract. I reached the junction where the three passages met, gasping for breath. The main corridor stretched ahead, leading back to the maintenance shed and freedom. But as I started toward it, my headlamp illuminated something that made my blood freeze. The exit was blocked. A mass of the same dark, vine-like growths I'd seen connecting the train cars to the chamber floor had spread across the passage. They writhed and pulsed with organic movement, completely sealing off my escape route. As I watched in horror, they began to spread further, creeping along the walls toward where I stood. The left passage, the maintenance tunnel, was still clear. I had no choice. I plunged into the narrow corridor, my shoulders brushing the walls on either side. This passage was different from the others. Where the main tunnels had been carved from that strange warm stone, this felt like genuine Tokyo metro construction, concrete and rebar, industrial fixtures, the familiar sterile environment of urban infrastructure. But it was wrong in subtle ways. The emergency lighting strips were dark, but they cast shadows anyway, as if illuminated by some light source I couldn't see. The maintenance doors along the walls were sealed not with locks, but with more of those organic growths, hardened into shell-like barriers. And everywhere, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were messages in multiple languages. "Don't go deeper. They're still breathing. The train never stopped. Sato was the first but not the last Sato." Yamamoto had mentioned that name in the coffee shop. What had happened to Sato? The passage began to slope downward again, and I realized with growing horror that despite my desperate flight, I was still descending. The tunnel system was designed like a trap. All paths led deeper, none led out. How many urban explorers had found their way down here over the years? How many had become part of whatever was growing in the depths? I stopped to catch my breath and check my equipment. The camera was still recording, though the battery was down to 40%. My phone remained dead, no signal, no GPS. The emergency whistle felt pathetic in my hand. Who would hear it down here? The protein bars and water seemed like tokens from another world, a world where people worried about normal things like hunger and thirst, instead of impossible living trains and transformed engineers. That's when I heard voices. They came from ahead, echoing through the maintenance tunnel. Human voices speaking in urgent, frightened tones. Japanese mostly, but I caught fragments of English and what sounded like Korean. Other explorers, other people who had been lured down here by curiosity or desperation. I followed the voices, hope and terror warring in my chest. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe together we could find a way out. Or maybe I was walking into something worse than what I'd left behind. The maintenance tunnel opened into a smaller chamber, and what I found there shattered any remaining hope I had of this being some elaborate urban legend or hallucination. There were 12 of them, sitting in a rough circle on the concrete floor. Men and women of various ages, all wearing the remnants of street clothes that had seen better days. They looked like they'd been down here for weeks, maybe months. Their skin had that same pale, waxy quality I'd seen in Yamamoto's transformed face, and their eyes reflected light like animals. But they were still human enough to be terrified. "Another one," said a middle-aged Japanese man in torn business clothes. "How long have you been down here?" "I just got here," I stammered. "Tonight, a few hours ago. There has to be a way out." "We need to." "There's no way out," interrupted a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings. She spoke English with an American accent. "I'm Sarah. I've been down here for... God, what day is it? I came down in August. Found this place on an urban exploration forum. Thought it would make a great Instagram post." "The tunnel's shift," added an elderly Korean man. "The passages you take to get down don't exist when you try to go back up, and if you stay too long..." He gestured to his own face, where the skin had begun to take on that characteristic waxy sheen. "What's happening to us?" I asked. It was the businessman who answered. "We're being digested, slowly. The air down here, the warmth, all those organic growths, they're breaking us down, changing us, making us part of the system." "Part of what system?" Sarah laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You haven't figured it out yet. This isn't an abandoned subway. It never was. This is something older, something that was here long before Tokyo, long before Japan had trains at all. The construction in the 90s wasn't building something new, it was connecting to something that already existed." "The train cars," I said. "I saw them. They're alive." The Korean man nodded grimly. "Those aren't train cars. They're cocoons, or eggs, we're not sure which. But every few days something hatches from them and crawls up toward the surface, and when it comes back it brings more people down here." "Like Yamamoto," I said. The group exchanged glances. "You've met him?" Sarah asked. "Tall guy, maintenance coveralls, used to be human." "He's the one who gave me directions to get down here. He lured me." "He lures all of us," the businessman said. "Different faces, different stories, but always the same result. We think we're exploring, but really we're just being harvested." "Harvested for what?" Before anyone could answer, we heard the footsteps. Step, step, step. Not just one set this time, but many. Yamamoto wasn't alone anymore. "They're coming for the feeding," Sarah whispered, and I saw real terror in her transformed eyes. "It happens every few hours. They take one of us up to the train and they come back different, more like them, less like us." The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by that metal scraping sound, multiplied now into a horrible symphony. I counted at least 6 different sources, maybe more. "Hide," the Korean man urged. "New arrivals sometimes get a grace period. A few hours to adjust before they start the process. But if they see you..." I looked around the chamber desperately. There were several maintenance hatches in the walls, but most were sealed with the organic growths. One in the far corner looked clear, its metal door slightly ajar. "There," I pointed. "That leads to the deep levels," the businessman said. "No one who goes down there comes back." "No one who stays here stays human," I countered. The footsteps were almost at the chamber entrance. I could smell that metallic, medicinal scent growing stronger. In seconds, they would be here. I ran for the hatch, wrenched it open, and squeezed through just as the first of the transformed figures entered the chamber behind me. The last thing I heard before sealing the hatch was Sarah screaming, not in pain, but in a kind of ecstatic terror that was somehow worse. I was alone again, in a narrow ventilation shaft that led down into the deepest parts of whatever this place really was. My headlamp illuminated a straight drop of at least 20 meters, with maintenance rungs bolted into the concrete walls. As I began my descent into the depths, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was exactly where this thing, whatever it was, wanted me to be. Every choice I'd made, from following Yamamoto's map to running from the living train to hiding in this shaft, had been guided, orchestrated. I was being herded towards something, and I was about to find out what. The shaft descended into a darkness so complete that my headlamp seemed to be swallowed by it. 20 meters became 30, then 40. My hands were raw from gripping the metal rungs, and my arms screamed with exhaustion. But worse than the physical pain was the gradual realization that the air was changing as I descended. It was getting thicker, more humid, and that organic smell was so strong now that I could taste it on my tongue, sweet and rotten, like fruit left too long in the sun. With each breath, I felt something coating the inside of my lungs, something warm and viscous that made breathing increasingly difficult. At 60 meters down, the shaft opened into another chamber, and I dropped the last few feet onto a floor that felt wrong under my boots. Not concrete, not stone, but something soft and yielding that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. My headlamp beam revealed a sight that nearly broke my sanity. I was standing in what could only be described as a nursery. The chamber stretched out beyond the reach of my light, but I could see dozens, maybe hundreds of oval structures arranged in neat rows. They were about the size of subway cars, but organic in nature, with translucent walls that pulsed with internal light. Inside each one, floating in some kind of fluid, were shapes that had once been human. Some were recent arrivals, still recognizably people, suspended in the amber-colored liquid with peaceful expressions on their faces. But others had been here longer. Their bodies had elongated, limbs stretching and multiplying, faces reshaping into something arthropod-like. They weren't dying, they were metamorphosing, and they were all breathing in perfect synchronization. Beautiful, isn't it? I spun around, my heart nearly stopping. Standing behind me was another figure in maintenance coveralls, but this one I didn't recognize. He was tall and thin like Yamamoto, with the same waxy skin and 2 long limbs, but his transformation was more advanced. His face had split down the middle, revealing row upon row of small, sharp teeth, and his eyes had multiplied into compound structures that caught and reflected my headlamp beam. "Who? What are you?" I managed to whisper. "I was Sato," he said, his voice coming from somewhere inside that split face. "Sato Kenji, construction foreman, project manager for the Kitashimagawa extension. I was the first to find this place back in 1994, the first to understand what we had uncovered. Sato." The name Yamamoto had mentioned, the worker who had been changed, but that was over 30 years ago. "You've been down here for 30 years. Sato's compound eyes seemed to focus on me with amusement. "Time moves differently here. This place exists outside your linear understanding of minutes and hours. I have been here for 30 years. I have been here for 30 minutes. Both are equally true." He gestured toward the cocoons with one elongated arm. Do you know what we found when we broke through into these chambers? We thought we were building a subway tunnel, connecting neighborhoods, making transportation more efficient. Instead, we found the nursery of something that has been sleeping beneath Tokyo for millennia. I backed away from him, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber had only one entrance, the shaft I descended. "What is it?" I asked. "It is older than your species," Sato said. "It was here when this land was covered by ocean, when the first humans crossed the land bridge from the continent. It has been patient, waiting, growing slowly in the deep places. Your city simply grew over it, never knowing what lay beneath." As he spoke, I noticed that the breathing rhythm of the cocoons was changing, becoming faster, more excited. Some of the more advanced transformations were beginning to move within their fluid prisons, pressing against the translucent walls. "The subway construction was an accident," Sato continued, "but a happy one. For the first time in centuries, it had direct access to the surface world. To fresh material for the nursery." "You mean people?" "I mean evolution," Sato corrected. "Your species has reached a dead end, 𝒉𝒂𝒓. You fight, you pollute, you consume without purpose. But this is transformation into something greater. Something that can survive what's coming." "What's coming?" Sato's split face widened in what might have been a smile. "The awakening. When there are enough of us, when the nursery is full, the mother will wake. She has been sleeping for so long, dreaming of the day when she can reclaim the surface world. And soon, very soon, that day will come." Behind him, I could see movement in the deeper parts of the chamber. More figures in coveralls, but these were barely human anymore. Some moved on too many legs, others had grown additional arms, and all of them were heading in our direction. "Don't fight it," Sato said gently. "The transformation isn't painful. In fact, it's quite pleasant. All your fears, all your worries about money and career and purpose, they simply fade away. You become part of something infinite, something perfect." "I saw the others," I said desperately. "The people in the chamber above. They were still human." "They're ripening," Sato explained. "The process takes time. We need them to maintain enough of their original form to serve as lures, to bring more material to the nursery. But eventually, they all join us in the cocoons. And when they emerge," he gestured to his transformed body with pride. I thought of Sarah, the American girl with purple hair, of the businessman in torn clothes, the Korean man, all the others sitting in that circle, slowly losing their humanity. How long before they ended up like Sato, or suspended in those pulsing cocoons? "Your camera," Sato said, noticing the device still clutched in my hand. "You've been recording all of this," I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good. The mother appreciates documentation. When she wakes, she'll want to understand how the surface world has changed in her absence. Your footage will be educational." The approaching figures had formed a rough circle around me now. I counted 8 of them, all in various stages of transformation. Some still looked almost human, while others had become something that belonged in a nightmare. But all of them were smiling with too many teeth. "It's time, 𝒉𝒂𝒓," Sato said. "Time to choose. You can fight us and we'll simply take you. The transformation will happen whether you consent or not. Or you can accept your evolution willingly and the process will be gentler." I looked around the circle of transformed beings, then at the rows of cocoons stretching into the darkness beyond my headlamp's reach. Hundreds of people, all suspended in that amber fluid, all slowly becoming something else. And somewhere in the depths of this nursery, something ancient and vast was sleeping, dreaming of the day it could rise and reclaim the world above. "I need time to think," I said. Sato tilted his head, compound eyes glittering. "Of course, but not too much time. The mother is stirring and she's hungry. The more you delay, the more enthusiastic she becomes about new arrivals." As if summoned by his words, a sound echoed through the chamber from somewhere far below. Not breathing this time, but something deeper and more primal. A sound like tectonic plates shifting, like mountains being born, the mother stirring in her sleep. And then, impossibly, I heard something else. Something that shouldn't have existed in this place of transformation and horror. I heard my phone ringing. The sound was coming from above, from the shaft I'd descended. My phone, which had been completely dead for hours, was somehow receiving a call in this place that existed outside normal space and time. Sato's expression changed, compound eyes narrowing. That's not possible. But it was happening. And in that moment of confusion, as all the transformed beings looked up toward the sound, I saw my chance. I ran toward the nearest cocoon, pulled out my emergency whistle, and blew it as hard as I could. The shrill sound echoed through the chamber, and every cocoon began to pulse faster, the transforming figures inside thrashing against their fluid prisons. In the chaos that followed, as Sato and his transformed companions tried to restore order to their disturbed nursery, I sprinted for the shaft and began climbing faster than I'd ever climbed in my life. The ringing continued as I climbed, echoing through the shaft with impossible clarity. Below me, I could hear Sato shouting orders in a language that wasn't quite Japanese, wasn't quite human. The transformed beings were following me up the shaft, but they moved differently now, skittering and chittering like insects, their elongated limbs finding purchase on the walls in ways that human anatomy shouldn't allow. My muscles screamed as I hauled myself up rung after rung, the camera banging against my chest with each movement. The battery was down to 15%, but somehow it was still recording. Whatever was happening here, whatever I'd discovered, it was all being documented. If I didn't make it out, maybe someone else would find the footage and understand what lay beneath Tokyo. The phone stopped ringing just as I reached the maintenance hatch that led back to the chamber where I'd left the other victims. I paused, gasping for breath, and heard something that made my blood freeze. Silence. No more chittering from below, no more shouting, no sound of pursuit, just the rhythmic breathing that permeated the entire tunnel system, growing louder and more urgent. I pushed through the hatch and found myself back in the small chamber, but it was empty now. The circle where 12 terrified people had been sitting was vacant except for torn clothing and dark stains on the concrete floor. Whatever had happened during the feeding had taken all of them. All except one. Sarah sat alone in the center of the chamber, but she was different now. Her purple hair had fallen out, leaving pale, waxy scalp behind. Her skin had the same translucent quality I'd seen on the more advanced transformations, and when she looked up at me, her eyes reflected my headlamp beam. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had that same grinding quality I'd heard in Yamamoto and Sato. "You came back." "Sarah, we need to get out of here. I found a way deeper, but there might be another." "There is no out," she interrupted, standing with movements that were too fluid, too graceful. "There never was. The surface world. It's not real anymore, Marcus, not for people like us." "What do you mean?" She smiled, and I saw that her teeth had grown longer, sharper. "Your phone. It rang, didn't it, down in the nursery?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Mine's been ringing too. Want to know who's calling?" She pulled out a smartphone that should have been as dead as mine had been. The screen was lit up, showing an incoming call from a contact labeled Yuki. My girlfriend. Sarah's phone was somehow receiving calls meant for me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Nothing's impossible down here," Sarah said. "This place exists outside normal reality. Past, present, future, they all blend together. Your Yuki, my parents, everyone we left behind on the surface, they're calling because they know. Deep down, in some part of their minds that remembers what came before civilization, they know that we've found the truth." "What truth?" "That the surface world is ending," she said simply. "The mother has been patient, but she's tired of waiting. The nursery is almost full, and when she wakes, Sarah gestured around us. This will be the only reality. Underground, in the deep places, in the spaces between spaces, the surface will be reclaimed. As if summoned by her words, the breathing sound grew louder, more urgent. Somewhere far below, something vast was stirring. You felt it too, didn't you? Sarah asked. When you first came down here, there was a part of you that recognized this place, that knew you belonged here. She was right, and that terrified me more than anything else I'd experienced. There had been something familiar about the warm stone passages, something that called to a part of my brain that was older than language, older than conscious thought. The city above is just a mask, Sarah continued, a thin shell over something ancient and hungry. Every subway tunnel, every basement, every foundation digs a little deeper into her domain, and now finally she has enough servants to wake up properly. You're insane, I said, but the words felt hollow. Am I? Sarah pulled out her phone again and showed me the screen. It wasn't showing a call from Yuki anymore. Instead, it displayed a live video feed of Tokyo's streets, but they were empty, completely, impossibly empty. No people, no cars, no signs of life at all. Just abandoned buildings and empty roads under a sky that looked wrong, too dark for daytime, too bright for night. That's the surface world now, Marcus. Everyone who could leave has left. Everyone who couldn't, well, they're down here with us. I stared at the impossible footage. When did this happen? Time moves differently here, remember. Sato tried to explain it to you. We've been down here for hours, but up there it might have been days, weeks. The transformation isn't just happening to individuals, it's happening to reality itself. The sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, but these weren't the measured steps of the transformed beings. These were frantic, desperate, someone running. A figure burst through the entrance to the chamber, and I recognized him immediately. Yamamoto, but not the transformed version I'd encountered earlier. This was the human Yamamoto, the old engineer from the coffee shop, still wearing his civilian clothes, his eyes wide with terror. "You have to help me," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "I've been running for, I don't know how long. They're everywhere. The things that used to be people. They're taking everyone down to the deep places." Sarah laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Marcus, don't you see? This is where it gets really interesting." I looked between the two Yamamoto figures, the human version kneeling before me, and my memory of the transformed creature who had lured me here. Both were equally real, equally present in this space that existed outside normal time. "Which one is real?" I asked. "Both," Sarah said. "Neither does it matter. In a place where past and future collapse into a single moment, where transformation and stasis exist simultaneously, reality becomes fluid." The human Yamamoto looked up at me with desperate eyes. "Please." "I gave you the map, but I didn't know what it would lead to. I thought I was warning you away, but I think I was always meant to guide you here. Even when I tried to save you, I was serving something else." "The mother," Sarah said. "She's been planning this for centuries. Every choice, every decision, every moment of free will we thought we had, it was all leading here to this moment, to the final feeding." The breathing sound was getting louder, and now I could feel it through the floor, through the walls. The entire tunnel system was a circulatory system, and something at its heart was waking up. "There's still time," the human Yamamoto said. "If we can reach the original entrance, the maintenance shed, maybe we can." "There is no original entrance," Sarah interrupted. "Don't you understand? The moment you set foot on those stairs, you crossed over. The maintenance shed, the street above, the entire world you remember, it's all part of the nursery now." She was right. I could feel it in my bones, in the increasingly thick air, in the way my camera continued to function despite its battery showing 0%. We weren't in an abandoned subway system beneath Tokyo. We were in the digestive system of something vast and ancient, and it was finally ready to feed. "But there is one choice left," Sarah said. her transformed features growing more pronounced with each word. You can fight the inevitable and be consumed slowly, painfully, or you can accept your evolution and become part of something greater. The human Yamamoto shook his head frantically. No, there has to be another way. There's always another way. That's when I heard my phone ringing again. But this time it wasn't coming from the shaft above. It was coming from my own pocket. The phone I knew was completely dead. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. The screen was lit up, showing an incoming call, but the contact name made my heart stop. Marcus. I was receiving a call from myself. Sarah clapped her hands in delight. Oh, this is perfect. The mother is offering you a choice, Marcus. Answer the phone and speak to who you could become, or refuse and discover what happens to those who resist transformation. My finger hovered over the answer button. Around me, the breathing grew louder, more insistent. In the distance, I could hear the sound of something immense moving through the tunnels, something that dwarfed even the living train cars I'd seen in the chamber above. The mother was waking up, and she was coming to collect her newest children. I stared at my phone screen, at my own name glowing in the darkness. The ringtone was my own voice, saying hello over and over, but distorted, changed, like it was coming from underwater or through layers of that amber fluid I'd seen in the cocoons. Answer it, Sarah whispered, her transformed features beautiful and terrible in the LED light. Find out who you really are. The human Yamamoto grabbed my arm with shaking hands. Don't. Whatever you do, don't answer. That's not you calling, that's what you'll become if you give in. But I could feel the pull, the same inexorable attraction that had drawn me down into these tunnels in the first place. My thumb moved toward the answer button almost of its own accord. Then the wall exploded. Concrete and steel erupted inward as something massive forced its way through the chamber wall. In the chaos of falling debris and choking dust, I caught a glimpse of what the mother truly was, not the giant creature I'd imagined, but something far worse. She was the tunnel system itself, the warm stone passages, the breathing walls, the organic growths. The entire underground complex was her body, and we had been crawling through her digestive tract like bacteria. But now she was consolidating, pulling her distributed consciousness into something more focused, more purposeful. The walls around us rippled and flowed like liquid, reforming into appendages that reached toward us with deliberate intent. Too late, Sarah laughed as one of the appendages wrapped around her waist and lifted her into the air. She's awake now. She's hungry now. The human Yamamoto screamed as another appendage seized him, but his scream cut off abruptly as his body began to change, stretching and flowing like heated wax. I watched in horror as he transformed into his other self, the creature in coveralls who had lured me here. The timeline was collapsing, past and present merging into a single terrible moment. My phone was still ringing. I ran. The chamber was collapsing around me, walls flowing together, ceiling dropping. But there was one passage that remained open, a narrow gap between two merging walls that led deeper into the system. I squeezed through just as the space behind me sealed shut with a wet, organic sound. The passage was different now. The walls were no longer stone or concrete, but something that felt disturbingly familiar, warm, slightly yielding, with a texture like human skin. They pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat, and I realized with growing horror that the mother wasn't just waking up, she was syncing with me, learning from me. My camera was still recording, though the display showed impossible readings, negative time codes, GPS coordinates that placed me in the center of the Earth, battery levels that fluctuated wildly between 0 and 100%. But it was still functioning, still documenting everything. The passage opened into a chamber I'd never seen before, though it felt achingly familiar. It was my apartment in Harajuku, perfectly recreated down to the last detail. My unmade bed, my editing equipment, the stack of unpaid bills on my desk. Even the view through the window showed the correct Tokyo street scene, complete with morning commuters and the gentle hum of traffic. But it was all wrong. The proportions were slightly off, the colors too vivid, and when I looked closely at the people on the street below, I could see that they all had my face. Impressive, isn't she? I turned to find myself face to face with myself. Another Marcus, identical in every way except for the eyes, which held that same reflective quality I'd seen in all the transformed beings. She's been studying you, my doppelganger continued, learning from your memories, your desires, your fears. This apartment is exactly as you remember it, not as it actually was. She sees through your eyes now. Who are you? I'm who you become if you answer the phone, he said simply. I'm the Marcus who said yes to evolution, who embraced the transformation instead of fighting it. I'm the Marcus who understood that individual consciousness is just a temporary illusion. My phone was still ringing. It had never stopped. What happens if I answer? You join with her, the other Marcus said. Your consciousness becomes part of something infinite, something that has existed since before your species crawled out of the oceans. You become eternal. And if I don't, you remain yourself, alone, afraid, mortal. He gestured around the recreated apartment. She'll keep you comfortable, of course. This reality she's created for you is perfect in every way. You can live here forever, editing your documentary footage, never aging, never dying, but always knowing that you chose isolation over transcendence. I looked down at my phone. The caller ID had changed again. Now it simply read, choose. The surface world is gone, the other Marcus continued. Everyone you knew, everyone you loved, they've either been transformed or they've fled to places where her influence can't reach. There's nothing left for you up there. Yuki, I said. My girlfriend, what happened to her? The other Marcus smiled sadly. She was one of the first to be called. She's in the nursery now in her cocoon, becoming something beautiful. When she emerges, she won't remember pain or loneliness or fear. She'll be perfect. I thought of Yuki, her laugh, her terrible cooking, the way she always stole my hoodies and looked better in them than I did. The thought of her suspended in that amber fluid, slowly losing her humanity, filled me with rage. You're lying. I'm you, he said. I can't lie to myself. That's when I noticed something he'd missed, something the mother had gotten wrong in her perfect recreation of my apartment. On my desk, next to the stack of bills, was my camera's memory card reader, and connected to it was the backup drive where I automatically saved all my footage. The drive was active, its LED blinking rapidly as it transferred data. My camera was still recording, still documenting everything, and somehow it was uploading that documentation to a backup system that existed outside of this constructed reality. Every horror I'd witnessed, every revelation about the mother and her plans, every detail of the transformation process, it was all being saved, transmitted, preserved. The mother might be able to control physical reality down here, might be able to transform matter and consciousness at will, but she hadn't accounted for digital redundancy. She was ancient, older than human technology, and she didn't fully understand how information could exist independent of physical form. You see it now, the other Marcus said, noticing my gaze. She's learning from your memories, but she's also preserving them. Every moment of your experience is being archived, studied, cataloged. You're not just being transformed, you're being documented. For what purpose? The next phase, he said. When she reclaims the surface world, she'll need to understand how to interact with human technology, human social structures, human psychology. Your footage, your memories, your very consciousness, it's all research for the coming integration. My phone stopped ringing. In the sudden silence, I could hear something new, not the rhythmic breathing that had pervaded the tunnel system, but something more complex. Multiple rhythms overlapping, like a vast orchestra tuning their instruments. The mother wasn't alone anymore. She was conducting a symphony of transformed consciousness, billions of individual minds that had been absorbed and harmonized into something greater. "It's time," the other Marcus said. "She's calling all her children home." Through the fake window of my recreated apartment, I could see the street scene changing. The people with my face were looking up, all at the same time, all with the same expression of recognition and belonging. Then, in perfect unison, they began walking toward the nearest subway entrance. "The integration is beginning," the other Marcus explained. "Surface and depth, individual and collective, human and post-human, all becoming one. You can be part of it, or you can remain here alone, watching it happen through your window." I looked down at my phone one last time. The screen was black now, but I knew that if I wanted to, if I chose to, it would ring again. The mother was patient. She had waited millennia. She could wait a little longer. But as I stood in that perfect reproduction of my imperfect life, watching the last remnants of humanity walk willingly into the depths, I realized something important. I was still holding my camera, and it was still recording. Whatever choice I made, transformation or isolation, integration or resistance, it would be documented, preserved, transmitted to that backup drive, and from there, who knew, maybe to servers that still existed in the abandoned surface world. Maybe to other survivors, other explorers, other people who needed to know what lay beneath their cities. The mother had created the perfect trap, the perfect choice between transcendence and solitude. But she had also, inadvertently, created the perfect opportunity for testimony. I looked at the other Marcus, my transformed double, and smiled. "I choose door number 3, I said, and smashed the camera directly into the backup drive. The LED light went out. The data transfer stopped. And in that moment, as the mother's perfect simulation began to collapse around me, I heard something I hadn't heard since entering the tunnels. Sirens. Real sirens from the surface world, growing louder as if something was breaking through from above. The integration had failed. The documentation was corrupted. And somewhere up there, someone had received my transmission and was coming to investigate. The mother's scream of rage shook the foundations of reality itself. But for the first time since I descended into her domain, I wasn't afraid. I was a documentarian, and I had documented everything. Now it was someone else's turn to find the truth.